final session is next week at the same time, but it's there is no real agenda for that one. It's just an open forum if y'all have any questions and want anything answered, any objectives that you want James and Stefan to go over. Yeah, please just let us know. We'll record it as well to share it out, just in case people missed it. Yeah, but please go ahead and bring your questions next week as well. More NSX. NSX is always a big one. Perfect. All right, so let me go ahead and start this. All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode or session number 5 of our VCP-VCF study group. So with us, we have James Tiffany and Stefan McTeef, and a couple other VMware Code community members in the chat to help us moderate. Thank you, Waldemar. We will be talking about VKS, formerly vSphere with Tanzu, formerly vSphere IaaS Control Plane, and just Tanzu overall. And any other questions that the group has. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to James or Stefan. I'm not sure which was going to start.
Cool. Thank you, Frankie. Yes, so today's session, we are going to cover a little bit of NSX because that does lead into some of the IaaS stuff as well. And we're going to then run through some IaaS stuff. And then we've been going through the exam guide and we've picked out some bits that we haven't covered so far. So as long as we've got time, we'll cover those bits as well. But Stefan's going to get us started with some NSX bits and pieces.
Right, yes. So on screen, there's a little bit here about isolated domains and shared instances as well. I'm not necessarily going to read you all of that slide, but being aware that you have the concept now of being able to create isolated workload domains with this now with either an existing NSX instance or whether creating a new one for your specific workload domain. So in that diagram, you can see on the right, you've got multiple workload domains all sharing a single NSX instance. Be aware that is not your management domain. Your management domain still needs its own and will produce its own NSX instance during the bring up process. So being aware that you have those two options is an important one. What was on the next one, James? If not, I will jump into Rolab if it isn't what I think it's going to be. No, we'll come back to that. We'll do a quick look at those kind of NSX, just in general. I think we have only had a small look at it throughout the previous sessions. So I just want to give anybody who perhaps hasn't really had a huge amount of time to go through the UI a chance to sort of see it and understand a little bit about where things are and where you might want to do some troubleshooting on things. So here is an NSX 4 something or other. I think it's 421. I've not heard this particular one. Yeah, 421, which is the release that comes in 5.2. And this is the home dashboard if you've never seen it. You get your general overview, a little bits of details here, none of it overly specific for the exam, but just being aware of the different things in here can be quite useful. One of the places that can be quite useful from a troubleshooting perspective is seeing where you've got alarms in your environment. So you get this dashboard. There is a option over here to be able to start to filter to an alarm state and then select your open ones. I think I've got some password expiries. I know I've got some login that's not working correctly at the moment, and it's reporting that back to me and gives you various different recommendations, etc. So that's quite a useful one for knowing where you can find some of the issues that are in your state at the moment. And then go into a bit more of this kind of the settings side of it. So this is your system overview page. Excuse me, it's got some details of some certificates, etc. on this particular page, but we've also got some counts of various different entities. So we've got 3 management nodes, which are my 3 NSX managers that get brought up as part of the bring up process in a management domain. I've got my 4 transport nodes, which are the 4 ESXi hosts that are brought up again as part of the management domain. And in this case, I've actually deployed a NSX edge cluster. So I've actually got 2 transport nodes at the moment, and we have a set of transport zones as well, which I won't go into too much detail at the moment. So first of all, if we take a quick look at the appliances page, this will then start to give us some details of our appliances. So I've got 3 NSX managers in a cluster at the moment, all behind a virtual IP. This one, I believe, is currently my active node, although saying that, I think it's actually shifted to this one now by the looks of it, because the load seems to be higher on this one. And this just gives you, again, a little bit of a visibility as to what your cluster's looking like at the moment in the alarms. Again, you can reference back from here. We then go into Fabric. We can actually take a look at our hosts and the cluster in which they're deployed in. So this is my vSphere management cluster. It was deployed as part of the VCF Bringer, and I've got 4 ESXi hosts in there. Again, various different options of which you can go off, but that's where you can start to find information on your hosts. I don't have any standalone hosts or other nodes in the sense. I've only got everything linked into my management cluster. We'll take a quick look under nodes. We'll see some slightly different nodes, and it being the edge transport nodes. So here are 2 edge nodes, which I've deployed as part of my edge cluster, which you can then see under here. And when you start to drill into these various bits of information, it may be useful to you, but I just want to give you a kind of a bit of a view of what you would see in those. Another thing from the exam perspective specifically, you know, part of your administrative kind of role, you're going to want to be backing up. We have touched upon this previously, but while we are in NSX, I thought I'd just mention this again. We get a UI that, you know, arguably looks a little similar to what you maybe see in vCenter, where we've got some various kind of endpoints, credentials, ports, dev directories, that type of stuff. And actually by default, in a VCF bring up, the backup location for NSX is a share on the VCF SDDC Manager. So if you were to actually SSH onto the SDDC Manager, this directory would exist and there would be backup files in there, and they're automatically set up on a schedule. This, I haven't actually touched this at all since they're bringing up. This has just happened. So yeah, being aware of what that looks like, again, important. Always have a look at what the available ports, protocols are, those types of things. It's all basic administrative information that you're probably going to want to know. Excellent. So kind of now into more, I guess, main purposes of NSX is networking. So if we go over to the networking tab, we can get an overview. And we've got a few different concepts here. Again, these are all high-level concepts you should at least have a basic understanding of, if not a better than basic understanding, because they're all important when it comes to administering a VCF environment. So we have the concept of a tier 0 gateway, which in short is a gateway that you would then tier up into some, let's say in this case, some physical infrastructure. So I've got this paired with some physical gateways attached to my lab. We then have some tier 1s. You can have multiple tier 1s. These can then all pair up to your tier 0, and you can have various levels of isolation on these. We'll talk a little bit later about VCPs. And tier 1 gateways are where you would ordinarily deploy various networking services. So on the left here, you'll see we've got VPN, NAT, load balancing, and EVPN tenant. All of these need to be configured to deploy to a tier 1 gateway. This that you see in here, apart from 2 of these segments, are all default as part of the initial bring up and will be spun up. We'll just show you that perhaps in a more of a topology form. So if we look down this bottom layer, we've got segments, which you could also just call network address spaces, various other names. I'll show you the segment section in a second, but these are all my different subnets in which I am presenting out as virtual networks. So at the moment, these are 2 defaults to do with the edge cluster. And we've then got a couple here, which if you remember from a previous session, we talked about AVNs. These are the 2 regions that get spun up as part of that deployment. I've then got those 2 specifically are connected up to my tier 1 management gateway. There is also the gateway firewall rules associated with that as a service at the moment. I've got a bit of a transit VLAN again, all default, although I think you can actually customize those addresses as part of the bring up, but don't quote me on that off the top of my head. And the management tier 1, which has then got some uplinks off to my physical networking infrastructure. And again, we've got another service in here, which is another gateway firewall. So we'll have a quick look at segments. So this is what it looks like. We've got NSX segments. Again, you'll see some similar names we just saw from a second ago. And if I go to add segment, I can start to fill out this wizard here. I can choose the gateway in which I want to configure it on. So I'm going to go with my tier 1. I'm going to select my transport zone, which is that one for the purpose of this. I can then set up a subnet. Just going to make one up. Let's go with that. Stick a /24 on the end. I'm not going to do any IPv6 stuff. I can set DHCP if I want as well. And then I could go ahead and hit save. And off it will go and create that network, which then I can start to consume as part of VM services or other services within the vSphere ecosystem. So that was segments. As you can probably tell, not a huge amount going on with it. There's one that I did configure as part of the AVN. And that has span up. I've got my gateway address and shows you the status, things like that. Again, you get links to alarms, statistics, and various other bits of data for if you're trying to troubleshoot things. Not a huge amount I can necessarily show you in here at the moment with the VPN side of stuff. I would suggest taking a look if you've got access to an instance or going into a hands-on lab, which we shared the links before, and I'm sure Frankie or somebody else in the chat will probably share those imminently now. I've just mentioned them, but there's loads of hands-on labs where you'd be able to go through some of these wizards and just familiarize yourself with the data that it's asking for and where they're configured. So things like where am I, what kind of a gateway am I having to select here, for these types of things. This one is telling me, even though I've got a 0 and a 1 available, I've got to configure this against my tier 1. Go and have a little play. And lastly, just we'll click on to, in fact, we'll have a look at that as well. Anybody that knows anything about networking will know what a NAT rule is. This service is exactly the same as if you were doing this on a physical device. You can set up your NAT rules in here as you need. So we'll take a quick look at load balancing.
Can you import rules from other devices like FortiGates and Palo Altos for NATs and so forth and so on?
Off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure. For the purpose of the exam, I don't think you're going to get anything like that necessarily. I think that's probably a little bit too deep for the administrative exam.
Right.
There might be somebody in the chat maybe able to answer that question. I don't believe from a quick look there's a way of doing it necessary from the UI, but that doesn't discount that there may be an API way of doing that. Achieve that.
We're looking at NSX, and some of the questions was like, well, we already have this, we already have that. How do we import some of that stuff up? So it's just kind of a off the topic question, but just curious. So thanks.
Yeah, no, hopefully somebody maybe to answer that one in the chat. If not, feel free to post it in perhaps the study group chat, and we'll get somebody to try and answer that one for you. Thanks for the question. Load balancers. You'll probably see this banner across the top about AVI. The NSXT native load balancer is scheduled for depreciation in the future, but it still exists as of the exam. So there are details. You could well get questions on this in that exam. Again, it will be very, very similar in terms of the details you're going to be asked as if you were doing this on a different load balancing technology. It's all very similar in terms of capability, and it's all available as virtual networking inside NSX. So again, familiarize yourself with the capabilities, etc., in which you would need to go by going through some of these wizards, perhaps in a hands-on lab. So again, you've got various different virtual services or servers, that you can set up in here. You can set up your backend server pools, profiles, monitors, etc. All a very traditional looking load balancing things. I am going to scoot back ever so slightly just to these AVNs and kind of, I know we've talked about AVNs, but we haven't necessarily talked about the implication from a NSX perspective. So when you are looking at deploying an AVN, when you're looking to put edge nodes to be able to deploy some of these services, so things like your AVN or your workload management, Kubernetes, cluster service, or whatever we just called it a second ago, Tanzu, IaaS Control Plane, there are requirements around the sizing for it, and understanding those is important. So I don't know if have you got a demo of that, particularly James, to show the sizing you have? Cool. So I'll let you talk about that in a second, but knowing your sizing is important for the different services in which you want to run on it. I think no, there's one more bit I wanted to do. Or should I do the troubleshooting later, James? Should I do that now, or?
Yeah, go on, do it now.
Let's do that now. So again, this exam is about administration, right? And troubleshooting and those types of things. So it'd be silly not to go and have a quick look at the troubleshooting section inside NSX. So there are a few different options down here on the left. I'm not going to confess to personally knowing them all inside out, because it's probably not my area of expertise. But I do have a rough idea that this is where I can go if I want to start to administer some tasks. So we've got IP fix, and we have the ability to set up the various profiles for that. We've got port mirroring. So if you did want to set up in this case, we have the option of remote L3 span, or we've got a logical span. So if you did want to set up some port mirroring, to capture traffic, etc., capabilities in there. So understanding what kind of troubleshooting you would be doing to warrant some of these tasks. So an example, let's go with, which is one that I'm a little bit more familiar with because I've been using this recently, is things like Traceflow, where I can start to actually analyze packets going across my infrastructure inside NSX. So in here, I can literally have a source virtual machine or a port or an interface. And again, same on the other side, but equally I can have an IP or a MAC address and select whether it's layer 2 or layer 3, etc. This can be really good for if you're trying to troubleshoot connectivity issues, etc. So I would definitely take some time to understand the specifics of what these troubleshooting tools can achieve and how you would apply them in a kind of more of a real world scenario or troubleshooting scenario as part of what you want to look at for the exam. I think, other than I have one more point to make on NSX, I've got 2 more points to make on NSX. From an administration perspective, password management, we've spoken about it a few times now over the different sessions. One thing that you should always remember, and not necessarily for the exam in its entirety, but keep it in mind as a concept, keeping good password health is important. One of the things that you definitely don't want to do is put the password expiry for things like your root, admin, and audit accounts with no expiry date, which you can set. Don't do it. 1, it's bad practice, but B, you're probably going to break the workflows inside VCF when it comes to upgrades because it will not like it. And I think the main thing is it's just a really, really terrible practice to do. They should be rotated frequently as part of your security policies. And then finally, just to talk about a couple of the differences between accounts. And if give me 1 second, I'll quickly connect to something to show you. We've got 3 accounts I just mentioned: root, audit, and admin. And they all have slightly different kind of roles, but I'm going to speak specifically just about the root account and the admin account. And if I can quickly get an SSH session, in fact, I will. Okay, so I'm going to log in as root for a second. Now notice in this case, this is what my UI, or my command line now looks like. So in here, I could start to do a ping. Traditionally, that you'd expect perhaps to do on a command line. Okay, and I'm now just pinging. I can pretty much now do anything that you would expect to do on I guess just a traditional command line. I've got none of the built-in NSX commands at this point. I am literally just using the raw operating system with root access. To show you the difference, if I was to log in as admin, get there in a second. It says, there we go. I now get a slightly different looking prompt back. So this is me now actually using the NSX CLI rather than the operating system CLI. So in here, if I was to do a question mark, I get a list of available commands in which I can run. So from here, I can do very, very different things than what I would be able to do if I was in the command line for root. So in here, I can be restarting services. I'm just looking through a few of those to see if there's any real interesting ones. I can do NS lookups. You can probably do that from root anyway. Does list give me have interest? I don't think I've actually run that in a while. Wow, there you go. Quite extensive list of commands then starts to appear, all very much kind of network orientated rather than appliance or operating system orientated. So being able to understand what type of things you would do from a troubleshooting perspective from this CLI compared to the root CLI is quite important. Anything else, James, you wanted to add to that, or anything I've missed?
Nope.
Cool. Anybody have any questions on that? I know it was probably quite a whistle-top tour, especially if anybody on here is an NSX specialist. They will probably agree that was quite a brief, high-level overview, but we only have so much time to be able to dive into a lot of these subjects, which you could probably talk about for a very long time.
Yeah, so the question is about login site and its position in region A rather than on the cross site. So one of those, there's a number of reasons behind the design decision, in that if you have a single instance, then you're dragging logs across the link, and if the link goes down, then you lose logs and things like that, which is why the design decision is to have logins, the logs in each separate area. Also, if you do have a disaster and you've lost your data center, having the logs for the nodes that have potentially been wiped out in another data center, does that do you much good? There's a whole white paper on the design decisions around being able to do the stretched and failover and stuff like that. So I'll dig out the link for that in a bit, and we can put it in there. Actually, it's already in there.
I think so. Probably just trying to do. Thank you, Waldemar. I remember reading that one the other day, and it does give the design decision justifications, like James just said. There we go.
So Stefan mentioned it as he was going through. Knowing around, we spoke about edge cluster deployment last time when we were specifically talking about AVNs, but knowing the requirements around what you need to do and what is required for an edge cluster will potentially come up. It's part of the blueprint. So you can see on the screen, there's when you actually go to deploy an edge cluster, it will actually give you a list of things to make sure that you have done those before you actually proceed. If any of those are missing, then it will fail the deployment. But once you get past the first bit of the general information, which is filling in IP addresses, passwords, that type of stuff, you actually get to the edge cluster settings. And this is what Stefan mentioned around different sizing. So by default, most, especially if you choose the AVN, the edge form factor will come out as a medium. Now you can increase that, obviously, that's your choice, but as default, the recommended sizing is a medium. Now you can see there that Kubernetes, the workload management, actually has its own section in there, and the reasoning behind that is because the minimum deployment edge size for workload management is large. You need to have that, otherwise it won't you won't be able to configure it later on. So that's the reason it's called out as a totally separate section there, is to make sure that you don't accidentally choose medium and then get into a pickle later on where you've got medium deployed and you really need large, and you have to work out how to unpick that without maybe taking down services. So you can see in there you've got the Kubernetes, which will default to large, and then you can choose other ones. AVNs will default to medium. You can choose bigger than that if you want to. And then custom is custom. You can choose whatever you want out of the edge of that. So when it comes to edge management, there's the you might deploy a 2-node edge cluster. You put more workloads on there. You think you need more throughput. So what you do have the ability to do is change the scale of a edge cluster. That gives you the ability to expand or shrink the cluster, and what that will do is that will add additional nodes into the already existing cluster with minus IP details and stuff like that, but it'll inherit the rest of the cluster settings. So that can be done through the SDDC Manager UI. You can see a nice little picture there. You can actually go into, you find your edge cluster, and then you have the ability to expand and shrink depending on the number of nodes you want to add. But to bear in mind, the minimum number of nodes in an edge cluster is 2. So you can't shrink a 2-node cluster down to 1. It always has to be 2 or more. Now, one thing that isn't available in the UI is the ability to resize an edge cluster. Stefan mentioned it. We've just seen it in the thing. It is quite important to make sure that you're meeting at least the minimum requirements. Obviously, as you grow, you can scale out, but sometimes you need to scale up as well. So there is a link. We'll put it in the chat. There is a KB article on how to do it, but it is, as you can see from the screen, it is actually a Python script that runs and changes all the stuff in the background. There's no pretty UI option to make the change to the cluster sizing.
I think there is another option as well, James, in that deploying additional egg node clusters at a bigger size, and then retiring the older ones. I believe that is another option, if I remember correctly.
Potentially, but obviously you'll have to fail over services and traffic and rules and all of that type of stuff. Potentially that could be a way around it, but you do also have the this script that you can run to potentially resize as well. And lastly, for the NSX bit is, we're not going to go into a huge amount of details on this because it's a massive subject anyway, but in 5.2, the version of NSX that comes with it introduced a multi-tenancy feature called VPCs, virtual private clouds. What this allows you to do is to start allowing non-infrastructure admin people to manage their NSX constructs. So you can see down in the bottom of this diagram is that you can create a project. You could assign that project to, say, a department. You could say have marketing, HR. You could give an admin and then a VPC admin. And what you're allowing them to do is then to make changes to the rules on their own NSX constructs. So you can give them access to a T1. They would then be able to do their own firewall rules, routing, all of those type of things that only affect them. And it takes the load off, obviously, the admin, this type of thing. Being able to consume it via API as well means that, things like the modern management container type services can be automated, can be consumed via the API without them having to make a phone call to the NSX admin and going, can you change this firewall rule because I've just deployed a new container and we now need port 10 open on our firewall. And you can see it gives you quite granular abilities for users to actually make changes themselves without affecting the rest of the infrastructure. Like I say, very, very quick, very basic explanation of what it does. For the exam, you probably won't have to go into huge amount of details on it, but knowing that it exists, what it does, could be beneficial in the exam and potentially going forward as well. So jumping over to what, depending on which of the exams, and we'll cover that in a bit, is either going to be referenced as the IaaS Control Plane or maybe VKS. But this is the ability to use container services in your VCF environment. So we've already gone through mentioning that as part of this, you need to make sure that you've taken it into account. Now, if you use it, so the ability to prepare an environment. So in reality, what you're doing is you're preparing the environment from a VCF view. So you already have a workload domain. So as part of the requirements, you need a workload domain, you need a minimum of 3 nodes, and you need NSX. All of those are what come as default as part of your workload domain. So you're already preparing your environment to take those container services. This then takes you the additional step to make VCF aware that a cluster is being used for container services, and then you carry on the rest of the tasks actually in Virtual Center itself. You don't create the services via VCF. They are then done as part of inside the vCenter. So just quickly, you can see basically you get NSX during a workload domain. You've deployed your edge cluster because it's a pre-requirement. Then you validate all of that as inside the SDDC Manager. You then skip over into Virtual Center and complete that piece of work. And just to quickly, we can't go through the full construct in here, but you can do this on a management domain. You're just about to see us do it. The majority of the safer way to do it could potentially be to deploy a workload domain, but obviously depending on resources, cost, and everything like that, you do have the ability to deploy into a consolidated environment as well. So inside your SDDC Manager in the dashboard, you can see there's a section for workload management. And when you click on the button, it asks you to make sure that all the prereqs are in there. So you need a valid license, you need a deployed workload domain. You must have done the edge cluster. You need a number of IP ranges for the container services, and you need a content library as well, which we'll cover in a bit. But when you go into here, it immediately clicks off the wizard. You can, if you have multiples of workload domains, you can choose your workload domain. This demo environment only has management. It'll go through and it will check all of the things it needs to do. So this actually failed previously on the fact that DRS wasn't set to fully automatic. So I changed that, and you can come in here. You click it, tells you number of hosts, all your details. So if you've got multiple environments, you can make sure you're picking the right one. Then it's going to go through a load of validation checks. So that's checking Virtual Center is all good to go, that it has the NSX information it needs, and that it's compatible. Obviously, if any of these fails, you can go back, rectify it, retry it, and come in again. And then you can see here, it shows you the information, and then it gives you the ability to click on the complete in vSphere. That would then take you to the next steps that you have to carry out in Virtual Center. And then once you've completed all of that, you would then see a cluster showing in there with all its details and give you the ability to license it. So from an exam view, if you look at the blueprint, that's pretty much what it's asking you to understand. It asks you to understand the pre-reqs, which we've gone through, how to do it, which we've just gone through. And then the last bit it asks you is around the tools, which there is a GitHub repo with all of the different tools that might be required in your environment to run your container services. So you've got the ability to come in here, understand which tools can be used where and how and what, and the ability to install them as well. So it's a bit of a weird one. When I was studying for this, I got very worried about this side of it and how much detail I needed to know and things like that. But like I say, from the blueprint services, it covers the actual how to get there. You don't need to know around Harbor and all those registries and how to create them and stuff like that. This is about managing the infrastructure that will run those services. Those services are configured after the fact.
Just one thing to add there, James, is understanding how to actually administer your containers and things and your Kubernetes environment after that. So understanding the tool sets that are available. So things like kubectl, APIs, UIs where available. Go and do some research about what options are available for that and why you would use certain ones. Again, it all comes under the administration kind of aspect and what the exam's trying to cover. You need to know about your tools and your options for that. Now, unfortunately, we don't actually have a live environment with Kubernetes in at the moment, and so sorry about that. But hands-on labs again are going to be your friend for that. There will be plenty of, and in fact, I'll try and find a link, or Wildemar will probably beat me to it, like he does with all the other links. There'll probably be a hands-on lab specifically to take you through this particular topic, and I will just try and get a link for that now. I'll pop that one in there, and then I'll let Frankie / there we go. Well, I already beat me to it. Oh no, that's a playlist. There you go. I'll add to the bottom of that. There's a lab. So that's a Kubernetes lab as well from hands-on labs. We'll do a search up on there. There's plenty of hands-on labs to get going, and you'll end up with, if you've ever used them, you'll see that you'll get your kind of guided work through that can take you through the process of doing it all. Definitely worthwhile going through the process. It will be a lot more beneficial to you than perhaps just watching us click through some buttons. Do it yourself, feel it, breathe it, and all those things.
Cool. You got 7 minutes to run through content libraries and storage policies.
17, haven't I?
Well, I need 5, so
cutting me down already. Go on then. Right, let's get through them. They're not too big a subject anyway. And anybody who's been using vSphere will probably be well aware of these concepts. Bear with me.
While Stefan gets this up, what we did is we went through the blueprint, and we've been covering, as part of the wider discussions, we've been then covering sections as we go along. These are a couple of the sections that we thought are worth calling out that we haven't covered so far. So we're just going to go through and explain them and do a couple of demos. The majority of people that are vSphere admins will know these, but it's covered in the exam blueprint, so it's worth calling out just in case it's been a while.
So first of all, content libraries, quite a good one. I created one earlier, just called Study Group Library. Just to go through some of the details that you can see on this one. So there's 2 different types of content libraries. There's local and the subscribed. You can enable publishing on a local library, which then allows you to consume that local library as a subscribed library from a different location. You have the option to put security policies on it, password protections, and also synchronization isn't applicable really on a local one because it's a local store. It's not actually synchronizing with anything. So there isn't actually anything in this because I didn't actually get a chance to upload anything, but you can upload all sorts of different objects into here. So you can do import item either from a URL or from a local file. You can give it a name and you can upload those files onto your content library. If I was to just go back and show you the wizard, again, I'm just going to put something random in there. We're going to do a new one. We get the option of local here, and we have this tick box for publishing. So if you intend to consume this local library from other vCenter servers, perhaps from a different data center or just other vCenters from other workload domains that you've deployed under VCF, you can effectively have a centralized content library where perhaps you're doing all of your publishing of templates and media. But rather than having to kind of sprawl that out to lots of different content libraries, you could subscribe all of your other, I guess you could call them secondary endpoints to point to this one, and you'll get various different options for that. So that's the local option. Again, we've got an authentication option here. And then here is the subscribe content library. Now, if I just come out of that wizard for a second and go into here, because I've got publish enabled, I'll get a URL. So what I can actually do is if I've taken that URL, and when I'm in here, I would be able to actually put that URL, which I'll show you because I've done that to another one in a second. And then the second item to note here, which is quite an important one, is depending on where your location is, you may not necessarily want to immediately download content from the source library because your link might be really slow. You might have other services that need to take priority. And it may be that actually you only really want it to download some content as and when it's requested. So if you're trying to consume a piece of the content from the subscribe location, that's when we may want it to pull down. And this will really depend on the scenario. So again, from an administrative perspective, this can really make a difference. Again, just depending on your scenario. You know, might be that you've got limited storage on the subscribe location. It could be a poor network link. Could be all sorts of things. So have a think, you know, about what those could be. Should you get anything like that in the exam. If I carry on through with the local library for a second, I can apply security policies. And then I need to specify a data store. So in this case, I'm just putting this on my vSAN data store. If you've got other storage objects, you can place them on there. I think in one of the validated designs somewhere, it does suggest that keeping your templates and things on a separate data store to your production VMs is advised. So keep that type of thing in mind, because again, it's an administrative decision that you're going to be making when you're publishing content and creating libraries, etc. And if I was to go through to the next one, this would then just allow me to build that, but this is the end result that you then see. If I switch over to a different one, so this is an older vCenter. So this is all vSphere 7 and VCF 4, but it was the only other one I had in available to me. What I've now done is subscribed. So this is now connected to the URL that we took out of the local library. It's automatically synchronizing. So as soon as any new content is appearing in the source, it ends up in here. And that is pretty much content libraries. So last bit from myself, is storage policies. These are quite important really from a vSAN perspective. If you're not familiar with them, a storage policy is something that you can apply to a virtual machine or a container, etc., to define the characteristics of how you want that data object to be stored. So you get a bunch of default ones. So basically everything in this list, apart from this bottom one, is all out of the box. You get these as part of deploying VCF. If I was to just take a look at this bottom one down here, there are various different things in which you can have on them. So if I edit this one and go through it, you could do host-based rules. In this case, I'm doing it for vSAN storage, but you can have data store specific rules for different storage types. So if you're using a traditional array for additional storage, you can also apply rules for VMFS, and you can also do tag-based placement rules. So if you've got certain tags on a VM to say, I don't know, this service needs to be on gold storage, what you can do is basically create placement rules that say that a data store has to be tagged with gold storage to be able to have this VM on it, and that would then make it compliant. I'll just click through that. In here, we can set different encryption options as part of this storage policy. We can set storage IO. By default, they're all disabled, but I selected some just so you could see it. And then we get through to the good bit. If this list isn't familiar to you, with the various kind of failures to tolerate or raids that are available, do go and have a look at that, familiarize yourself with them, understand the differences. You know, if you're going with a failure to tolerate of 1 and raid 1, understand how much extra storage is that actually going to take up on top of what the source data object is, and how much protection and failures you can get. I think the name there, 1 failure, kind of gives you an idea. If you've got RAID 5, why would I want to do RAID 5 over this? What difference is that making to my storage allocations? What extra levels of protection and performance perhaps is that giving me? And then these are probably slightly self-explanatory in that we are increasing the amount of failures in which we can then tolerate. But there are pros and cons to each. There's not really any point in just kind of go through them. You can probably have a quick Google of that, and you'll find probably a lovely little table on one of many websites out there, which will give you the breakdown. Definitely go and understand that. Same with this list here. At the moment, we're just a standard cluster, and I'm not doing any cross-site tolerance. Quickly try and blast through this and let James have the mic back. But encryption services, again, you can enable all these. I think James is going to talk about that in a second. Space efficiency for things like DGP compression, but you need to make sure those services are enabled on the data store that you want to be able to apply. So if I was to actually do this one now, you would see here, I don't have any compatible data stores because this one, my vSAN data store, isn't compatible because DGP compression isn't available. And the last thing for me is knowing this bit. Again, this should be probably basic vSAN information for anybody that's been using it. But if you want to use services like DGP compression, you need to be using an all-flash array. And try to do that, you can't be using hybrid, so a mixture of SSDs and traditional spinning disks. And I'll do one more thing, James, which is how do you apply one of those policies? So I've actually started shutting a few of these bits down in the background, but for instance here, if I was to go to VM policies on this NSX Manager and I wanted to edit the storage policy, I can go up here and start to select. I can't select this one here because I don't have a data store which is compatible, but if I did, I would then be able to select that, and those storage characteristics would then be associated, or would be associated with that virtual machine object. And you can do it per disk as well, should you want to be granular. Back to you, James.
Yeah, so one thing around the storage policies to remember is it's nothing to do with the SDDC Manager. So you can change, this is a vSAN service, these are virtual center services that you can change and make changes to without worrying about any of the the SDDC stuff. By default, your vSAN will be created with RAID 1 and failure to tolerate 1 because you're bringing it up with 4 nodes, and that's what you can't set RAID 5 and 6 on a 4-node cluster. So it would be worth going back in if you've done the bring up and you then expand it to say 10 nodes or whatever, to maybe changing the default policy for the data store to be something else that you want it to be, rather than set it to be RAID, leave it as RAID 1, and then every machine that you deploy you then have to change the default policy for as well. So you can play around with bits and pieces like that. I'll cover my bits again next week. So Dale, you were asking around the potential differences between that you've just taken your VCP-DCV and what the difference between potentially that and taking this exam would be. So I would say that it's already been answered in the chat around, obviously there's more products and stuff like that, but I would say very much the new VCP exams are more around your understanding of using and troubleshooting the products, rather than just how do you configure this, what's the maximums, those type of things that the older VCPs used to be more reliant on. This is very much they might ask you how to get somewhere. They might ask you what order to do something in, which unless you've maybe had a look around, actually do it day to day, then that's where I think the extra complexity comes in, because you are having to not only answer maybe one question, it's answering steps on how you get somewhere, or troubleshooting which tools to choose and things like that. So I think that's definitely, from my takeaway, how the two exams would differ. Hopefully that answers your question a bit more.
Yeah, it does. Just trying to, obviously I want to be successful in the test, but I also don't believe that the test will take me to the level of having to memorize the API call to list VDS that are present in a workload domain.
No, so well, certainly my experience is they're not trying to catch you out on, which one of these API calls would you use. It's knowing that the API calls are available is, the type of thing that they're potentially looking for. So it's not about having to memorize necessarily, a specific API call or the SOS command or things like that. It's knowing that they're there, that can be used in a troubleshooting method, or we've covered the deployment stuff and things like that, and after the deployment it then goes into the operational part of it, hence why we were covering things like the storage policies, and we're doing encryption next week and bits and pieces like that.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's actually been super helpful between you and what Frankie wrote in the chat. I think I have a pretty good understanding of what the knowledge level will be, or the requirement will be. I mean, I've been studying for a while. I'm due to take the test in 3 weeks. So,
Well, good luck on that. Hopefully this is, and obviously if you've got questions, I don't know if you've been in the previous sessions, but there is a Discord group that you can join and ask questions. So if things do come up that you might need some help with, and obviously, hopefully, you've got our details from this. We're on LinkedIn. If you wanted to ask something on there, then you're more than free to buzz over a question there as well. But certainly the Discord one, I would recommend being your first port of call, because you've got quite a few people in there that are very active as well.
yeah, I've been going back and watching your previous sessions. I just joined based on the vExpert announcement that came out earlier. Anyway, yeah, someone just put in the chat the Discord link. If we could get that, that'd be great. Right?
Yep. Well, I'm sure Frankie is probably already sneaking that out in the background.
Yeah, we're
Cool. So there were some other bits to cover, but I thought that question was a bit more important to get through, and I didn't want to rush the bits. What we'll do is we'll cover those at the start of next week's session. As Frankie mentioned, I think next week is pretty much a free for all, really. If you've got questions, if you've got stuff you want covered, we'll be here. There's certainly bits we can cover if we need to, but it's more around making sure everyone gets what they need out of it. So if there are questions ahead of time, drop them into the Discord. We'll make sure we prep for it. If there's anything that we've already gone over that you want covering in a bit more detail, we can do that as well. But basically next week's there's not going to be a hard and fast agenda. We'll cover off a couple of bits around encryption and stuff that I missed this week, but after that we can then go into a pretty much an open forum to let you guys get the most out of the final session, really. Someone's asked if we can do a summary review. Yep, we can definitely do that. We can go through what we've covered. Frankie has done an amazing study guide that we'll go through that as well, just to show you that. And that will definitely be a good way of getting a head start if you haven't already seen it. So yeah, we'll definitely make sure we do a summary review. We'll go through all of the key things like hands-on labs, all the stuff we've gone through, just to make sure they're all captured in one place as well. That's cool. Well, just to say thank you everyone for joining again. It's been again great questions in there, and yeah, hope to see you next week and speak to you on the on Discord and everything. So thank you everyone.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to hang out for a little bit. I'll stop the recording. I'm going to hang out for a little bit and put a couple of these links in here for people.